Welcome to the MS202 Lesson 04 on the Army Problem Solving Process. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS at the University of Montana, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. So to start off with, we're going to just think about a few things before we even dive into the lesson. And I want you to think about some things that you are personally facing. What are some of those problems that you are currently facing as a college student? And I know this is a broad question. It can cover financial, it can cover academics, maybe social issues, maybe just your work-life balance. There are so many things that we could be facing. I know I was in college once too. But think about some of those problems because we're going to work through a process today that you might actually be able to apply to your real life as well. Now, when you're thinking about some of those problems, what are some of the challenges that you are facing just now as a second-year ROTC cadet, if you're an MS2? Of course, if you're an MS4, MS3, even an MS1, same question. What are some of those challenges that you're facing just specific to being an ROTC cadet? Could it still be your work-life balance? Maybe trying to balance your time that comes with being a dedicated member of ROTC with a social life, or a family life, or maybe a relationship? Are you able to balance work with being an ROTC cadet? Are there some disadvantages to your outside life with being an ROTC, or is ROTC having some advantages for you? And then lastly, I want you to think about some of those challenges. How have you worked through those thus far? What are your methods? Do you have a specific plan in place, maybe with your advisor or mentor, to get through these challenges? Do you have outside resources like parents or clergy or friends? Or are you just winging it and taking each day as it comes? Which, trust me, I get it. I'm still in a time of life where sometimes I am just winging it. So now when we talk about the Army problem-solving process, I want you to also think about examples of difficult problems that you can think of where non-standard solutions, so not the easy answer or the first thought of answer, became the only option available to resolve that problem. Can you think of a time where you had to implement something that maybe wasn't expected as a solution? And then I want you to think about a time when you personally, or as part of a group, solved a problem. You identified a problem and you solved it. What was that problem? Was it easy, or was it maybe more difficult to solve? And how so? All right, so now that we've kind of got our brains set on what we're going to be learning about, you guessed it, solving problems, let's talk about our learning objectives. So what I'm going to lead you through today is just discussing what a problem is. What's the actual definition of a problem? Then we're going to define what the three types of problems are. And then I'm going to give you the 7 steps of what we call the Army problem-solving process. Because we're the Army, we like to have step-by-step manuals for everything. We even have a manual for Army problem solving. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some time to actually apply these 7 steps to a situation. You'll receive a scenario. I'm going to encourage you to pause the video, take some time to actually work through it, or take a picture and work through it the next time you want to look at your phone. But of course, as we always want to do, is we want to take what we're learning and we want to know how to apply it. And the best way to do that is just to practice. So let's define the problem. What is a quote-unquote problem? Well, the Army says it's an issue or an obstacle that makes it difficult to achieve a desired goal or an end state. That's a pretty broad definition. So having an issue or an obstacle, that's your problem. And it's only a problem if it's making it hard to achieve that goal that you have. Maybe it's something that is making it difficult to achieve a mission. Maybe it's difficult to achieve a personal goal that you've set yourself. That's the Army definition of a problem. So now that we know that, Of course, we're going to break that down a little bit more. There are 3 types of problems. There are well-structured, medium-structured, and ill-structured. When we talk about well-structured, these are easy to identify, and there are somewhat obvious methods to actually solve the problem. So the problem in itself is obvious. We understand what the problem is, and we have a pretty obvious way, or at least a right track forward to solve that problem. Now, what we see a lot of are medium structured, where they're a little bit more interactively complex, but we still have a way forward with them. Maybe the problem isn't as well defined. Maybe the solutions aren't as obvious. And then we have ill-structured problems, which by large, you actually see these a lot more often than you might think. These are very complex, non-linear, dynamic, have a lot of different pieces and parts moving with them. They are difficult to understand and solve. And maybe you're thinking right now, oh, well, a well-structured problem, that's 2 plus 2. It's easy to identify, and there's an easy method to solve that problem. And then maybe you're in a chemistry class or some sort of physics class or one of those really math-heavy courses that have complex, nonlinear, dynamic issues involved that can be more difficult to understand, and there's a harder, longer, more wayward way of solving that problem. So there's an analogy to think about: well-structured, medium-structured, and ill-structured. So those are your 3 types of problems. What I want you to know is obviously not all problems require some lengthy analysis. So we might have this 7-step process, but some problems are going to have a very clear-cut answer. We know that leaders will make quick decisions based on their own experiences. And this is also why I really emphasize and encourage you throughout all these lessons to take time to conduct the practical exercises. Take time to think about your own experiences, because when we're making those decisions as leaders, we really are, a lot of the time, more often than not, relying on the experiences we've had in the past. When have we experienced this specific problem, or maybe an analogy to that problem, and what method did we use to solve it? Now, some leaders do need that very systematic approach where it's step by step by step, and this is all going to be in how your brain thinks. Are you able to make those quick decisions and rely on your brain reaching back into experiences, or do you prefer a more structured approach, step by step? Now, the objective of problem solving isn't just, or using this process in general, isn't just to solve our near-term problems, but really it's set up so that we do so in a way that forms the basis for long-term success. So what that means is we can utilize this to solve one problem. And again, we use that experience in working through this problem to fall back later on when we have another problem that's similar. So we're using a near-term problem, but we're focusing on a solution that can be used long-term, and also developing an experience there that we can rely on in the future. So now, picture you're in a class here. In the problem that you or your group has solved in the past, did it help achieve long-term success for the situation, or was it just a short-term solution? And can you now identify what type of structure the problem was, or the obstacle? Was it a well-structured problem? Was it medium-structured? Was it an ill-structured issue? And then when you think about what type of structure was, do you think that made it easier or more difficult to solve? Now let's talk about those 7 steps of the Army problem-solving process. So, first, we gather information and knowledge. Then we're going to identify the actual problem, because sometimes what we think is a problem is far more broad than what we can get it down to in step 2. Then we're going to develop criteria, and I'll explain what this means in a little bit, but really just criteria for what actual plausible solutions could be. Then 4, 5, 6, you're going to then generate, analyze, and compare those possible solutions using the criteria that you developed in step 3. And then lastly, you're going to go ahead and make and implement that decision and go with it. Now, the great part about number 7 is you can implement a decision, find out that the problem remains, or that another problem pops up and you just start back over at step 1 and come back down. All right, so let's go through this step by step. So gather information and knowledge. This is very much a self-explanatory thing to think about. So this is something that actually continues throughout the problem. You're taking the time to take in information, take in experiences, understand what the overall situation is. It determines the problem by kind of defining its limitations. So think about like your left and right limits. The impact assessment is never going to stop. You're always going to think about what impact this problem has, as well as future thinking of what the solutions that you choose may have. It is absolutely required to actually gather all the information that you can to solve this problem. And as I always do, you're going to have it there in bold. What I really want you to pull out of this slide is that leaders have to know how to handle opinions and how to organize the information that they're receiving. So I want you to pause this for just a moment and think about what are some ways that we can gather information about a problem? Can we ask people around us? Can we get information from data systems? If it's a personal problem, can we talk to that person and maybe some other people that are close to that problem? If it's a family issue, can we pull in more information maybe about the history, maybe about future plans? You want to get as much information as possible because you need this to start thinking about solutions. You don't want to be deciding how to fix this problem without having all of the information that you possibly can get. Now, after we've gotten all of that information, we've pulled it all together, now we're going to identify the actual problem. So you may have a broad problem brought to you. Now, how do we bring that down to an actual solvable statement? Now, a problem exists when the current state, where you're at right now, differs from or impedes the achievement of where you want to be. That's as simple as what a problem is. Now, in order to identify that problem, you can use a variety of sources. So let's say it's an Army issue. You might look at your higher headquarter directives, maybe their guidance. Maybe you're the decision maker and you're looking at your own guidance. Maybe you're talking to subordinates, getting their information. Maybe you're talking to or thinking about your personal observations. What information have you brought together, and how are you using that to actually identify the true problem? With this, leaders are actively seeking to identify the cause, not just the impacts or the symptoms. What is causing this problem to be happening? I always tell people, if you're going to bring me a problem, bring me possible solutions, because that forces you to think through the cause of the problem, not just the complaints that are coming from the problem. Hopefully that makes sense. I cannot preach this enough to people. If you are going to bring a problem to your superior, to your boss, to your professor, come with solutions. Now, why is it important to not focus on the symptoms of the problem? Because the symptoms are just that. If we're just focusing on symptoms and we're trying to fix the symptoms of an issue, we're not fixing something at the root cause. We need to stop something at its root, not just be shooting down those 50-meter targets when really there's something much bigger shooting those targets up, right? That's why we want to focus on the actual cause of the problem, not just the symptoms of it. So now let's develop our criteria. This can be a little bit of a confusing step. So this is where we have a standard, a rule, or some sort of test of which something can be judged. That is the definition of criteria, right? It's a measure of value. When we're developing this criteria, it assists us in actually formulating and evaluating truly possible solutions. Our criteria is based on facts or assumptions, not just opinions. Now, leaders can use two types of criteria and they actually work together. So first, we're going to screen things. That's going to define your limitations of an acceptable solution. So that kind of keeps things realistic. Are these realistic? Are they attainable? Are these actual solutions that we could put in place? And then your evaluation is kind of that comparing where it differentiates among your possible solutions. And you'll understand why that's important in the next step here, but you want to be able to not have just one solution, and also you don't want 15 solutions that are kind of the same. We want to be able to evaluate and differentiate among our different solutions to an issue. Now we're going to start generating, analyzing, and comparing our solutions. So to generate, at this time, we are just formulating our possible issue or our possible solutions. So what can we do to fix this problem? Of course, you want to consider your guidance from your superiors. This is not a time to necessarily ask for forgiveness instead of permission. You need to be looking at what the guidance is and don't be stepping outside of your lane. You want to develop several alternatives, but don't waste time on so many solutions that you take time away from actually solving the problem itself, right? Your possible solutions are typically really honestly determined by your own experience and the time that's available. You might have months to fix something. You might have hours to fix something. What is your experience? How much time do you have? That's going to help you actually generate those solutions. Now, at the end of the day, leaders should always consider at least 2 solutions because the next steps really can't be done with just one solution. You have to be able to analyze and compare different fixes to a problem. So what are some ways that you think you could generate solutions to a problem? I think brainstorming. Let's bring a few people in and let's just talk these out. Another way, we can create different types of event maps, right? Where we have a solution and then let's map out how the impacts might come. Or let's start with a word map or a map cloud with the problem at the top and just start pushing out those different spikes that could have different solutions at the end connected. There are so many different ways that you can generate these solutions. It's really going to depend on your own experience in that time, right? Right now, so now we've generated, let's say we have 4 possible solutions. Now we're going to sit down and actually analyze each and every one. We're going to talk about the pros and cons, or what the Army likes to say, merits and drawbacks. What are the pros and cons to actually selecting each solution? You need to have well-defined and selected benchmarks. That makes this a lot easier because you're kind of starting this process of, okay, eliminating this. This is not nearly as helpful as this at this time. So we're really kind of narrowing down our solutions during the analyze process. During this, the leaders are determining the probable outcomes of implementing these solutions or these fixes. If I were to implement this fix, what are the then domino effects? What are the possible and probable outcomes? And this will help narrow that field of fixes that you're choosing from. So I kind of already explained this, but why is it important to have well-defined criteria? Well, it keeps you from throwing out completely unrealistic solutions that are going to end up being struck out during the analyze step anyway. So having that criteria knocked out at the beginning is going to keep you from overloading and overworking yourself during the end of this process. So you want to come into step 5 with pretty realistic and possible solutions. All right, and now we're going to compare our solutions. So now we've narrowed it down to our best options. We want to compare each of those to determine what the optimum one is. And the way that we do this is really doing a pros and cons list. And I'm sure you've done something like this. Maybe you did this for selecting your university. Maybe you did this for selecting ROTC as an option for you. Did you weigh the pros and cons? During this step, we're identifying which solution actually best solves the problem. And that's using our evaluation criteria from before, where we are deciding where we want the outcome to end up. Now, during this, leaders are using comparison techniques that'll really help reach the best recommendation. And this can look a little bit different than for the next person to the next person to the next person, right? There are a lot of different ways to use these techniques. I recommend you start practicing now so you can figure out what works best for your brain, because we all think and learn and act differently, right? And lastly, the making and implementation of that decision. At this time, now you've picked the best solution. You're going to refine that, maybe make it a little more narrow or a little more broad, depending on what the problem is. You're going to prepare your necessary implementation instructions. So now you're saying, this is my decision. Now you have to figure out, okay, go forth and make this happen. Here's the how. Here's my execution paragraph, if you will. This is the mission. Now this is how you're going to execute this decision. The next step is a lot like that supervise and refine, right? We're going to monitor the actual implementation and maybe compare results so that we can measure success. Think about that more like an after action review. We're going to watch and see, does this solution actually fix the problem? If so, awesome. Keep that in your toolbox for the next time this type of a problem pops up. If not, let's go back to the drawing board and start comparing, maybe going back to step 4 or 5 and looking at those possible solutions again. And just like that says, the leaders will then issue additional instructions when and if needed. So why is it important to monitor the implementation of the decision? 1, this is to make sure that your intent is being met with fixing this. And 2, it's to see if your decision and the solution that you've chosen is actually fixing that root cause of the problem, or is it just shooting down those 50-meter targets and the problem isn't truly getting solved? We're just handling the impacts of that problem, or the symptoms, if you will. And then also think about this entire process as a whole. What are the advantages of solving problems with this systematic approach? Is it helpful for you? Do you think it would be helpful for your subordinates or your peers? Is this standardized approach going to work for you? And what are the advantages, if so? So that's your Army problem-solving process. So hopefully you are already thinking about this, because I kind of hinted at it in a little slide ago, but how might you actually use this class in the future as an Army officer? Hopefully you're thinking about something along the lines of, it will allow you to make better decisions of your soldiers, provide better guidance, and improve your unit morale and effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, comparing all of those different options, when you're doing that and analyzing the effects, you're thinking about your soldiers and how those decisions are going to affect them. Now, how does having this Army problem-solving process help achieve and improve both individual and organizational success? Well, having that developed decision-making skill allows you to improve skills in analyzing, disseminating, and applying different information to your soldiers, peers, and superiors. So here's what I want you to do now. Of course, I can't hold you right here. You can exit out of this video and Charlie Mike, but I highly encourage that you look at this next scenario, at least look at it, and start to think about how you would solve this. So in class, normally you would take about 10 minutes to do this. You'd work through each of the steps of this process. I encourage you to do that if you have the time. Pull up a Google Word doc, pull out your pencil and notebook, use this scenario, and actually apply those 7 different steps. So here's your scenario here. Like many college students, you're short on cash. Your personal expenses and other college costs are way higher than what you were budgeted for, and you're concerned that you're going to run out of money before the school year even ends. You're debating about getting a part-time job, but you're unsure if this is a good idea. You know you need to be making money, but your time is limited since you're so involved in ROTC and other activities. Maybe this sounds familiar to some of you. You also need to maintain your grade point average, or you risk losing your scholarship, which could put you at a bigger financial disadvantage. So flexible hours are important too, because you have a busy schedule with ROTC and maybe other commitments. So I want you to think about this entire thing. Maybe this does apply to you. Maybe it applies to somebody you know. At the end of the day, it's probably going to apply to somebody that you're in charge of someday. So how would you implement those 7 steps of the Army problem-solving process? So this time, go ahead and pause the video, set your timer if you really want to be the A+ student today, and set it for 10 minutes and start to run through these different steps. And then come on back to the video and we'll close out. All right, so hopefully you actually paused that and you're coming back at the end of the 10 minutes. I would love to know what kind of possible solutions you came up with. Think about those, keep those in your toolbox, maybe apply them to yourself, see if it works for you. Compare with your classmates, see if they've done this scenario in the past. If anything, now you have some possible solutions to hand off to somebody else that might be going through the same thing. So let's debrief. How does this information reinforce the Army's focus, where we say we are developing the leadership for tomorrow's Army? That's the Army's focus right now in these courses for you. How does this information apply to that? Well, we know that leaders have to follow some sort of systematic or logical decision-making process to make sound decisions. And those sound decisions are going to promote and achieve both individual and organizational success. And now you've just learned about that systematic and logical decision-making process. And then, how does this information support your preparation or development as a future officer? Hopefully you've been listening to some of the things I've been saying about how you can impart some of this information onto other people, or how it's going to affect your soldiers in the future. But a platoon leader, your first likely officer job, once you put that gold bar on, as a platoon leader, you have to be ready to implement sound thinking and decision-making in your first assignment to achieve both soldier and unit success. You will be making hard decisions for a 21, 22, 23-year-old that you didn't expect yourself to have to make. So get the practice in now. Get the practice in for solving hard problems and making those hard decisions so that you're more confident and your process is more sound when you have to do it for real. That's going to impact real people's lives. All right, so in closing, thanks for hanging with me during this. Again, I know that's a lot of information, but hopefully there's something that you could pull out of this that'll actually help you either today, tomorrow, or 3 years from now. We discussed what an actual problem is. We defined those 3 types, right? Well-structured, medium-structured, and ill-structured. We talked about those 7 steps that we went through with gathering that information and knowledge all the way down to making and implementing a decision. And then hopefully you stuck around and you applied those 7 steps to a scenario. As always, thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions on any of this material or any of the other lessons that you've watched from me, please feel free to reach out to your Army ROTC instructor first, maybe an MS4, maybe a high-speed MS3. Get those questions answered. And if you still can't, you are welcome to reach out to me at silver.beatty@mso.umt.edu, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Thank you.